So those dollars would be designated under 2016 based on what you've learned from what your studies on your imbalance and what the salary structure should be. That's when you implement that. I think they're independent issues of one another.
Well, and the other thing, and let me just say, I talked with Cheryl about this a little bit this afternoon. We can have a study like that completed before the end of the year. We could implement the market adjustments in 2015.
Yeah, I think that and I think that our city administrator, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, so tell me if I'm off here. But I think we just heard our city administrator say very clearly that one of the big impediments to an effective merit program was the fact that we have market discrepancies in a lot of our positions. And so, you know, I'm still a true believer in merit. I think it's got some definite applications, but I think that there's an immediate need to address market discrepancies in certain positions. We know that there's some that are as much as 30% out of range. That's virtually impossible to be able to manage those positions without a great deal of churn. And if you have a lot of churn, then how the heck are you going to be able to have high performers? Your high performers are going to leave the organization the second that they become high performing, because they can find better, the same job with maybe less responsibilities at a higher compensation rate someplace else.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that's a great point, because, I mean, some of the, I know there was this salary information published in the paper, and, we had all these questions about merit. Part of the perceived discrepancy is because, we had 5 people that weren't even rated. They were so new. Then we had another subset of people that, are just kind of on their year mark. So do you really expect them to be high performing? So I think Steve is right. At some point, we have to make a decision as to how we're going to fix this stuff. But right now, we don't even know what we're fixing, to be honest with you. We haven't quantified that. Yet we still have to reward people for, in my opinion, look at rewarding or potentially rewarding people. But let's think about it this way. If I'm a high performer, and let's just say 2.86 is what it turns out to be next year as well, but I'm also already below whatever this pay study shows. So all of a sudden, you give me a 10% increase, right? You're going to give me a 10% increase to my base pay because of this. Effectively, that probably is not going to, if I'm doing that across the board, the fact that they don't have enough money for merit, not a big deal to me, to be honest with you. My performance review, I'm rated high performing, I get it, but my raise is a lot more than what I would have gotten at a 4% merit increase.
and also this also doesn't include reclassification of certain job codes too, because there are going to be some classes that are going, or positions that are going to be reclassed into another salary category, just because they'll be going outside the top part of their range, even though the range itself is way below where it should be in the market. So I think that there's going to be some reclassing as well in this process.
And you mentioned that you're sorry that we're having this discussion about having this study here. Gosh, I think in 2011 we were.
It's not a new request.
This is not a new request.
Not a new request.
So is this going to be the year that we do it, or is this going to be the year that we push it again? And I don't have a vote unless somebody abstains and we end up in a tie. But if I was voting, I'd be voting to bring us more in line with other cities that we're competing with.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, and I don't know how many people have seen, but the MARC data that we get pretty consistently, I mean, the fact is, if you look at that information, it's really hard to tell how relevant it is. And so it is. I mean, it's like, you're comparing, I'm going to use poor Jeff as an example, director of our Parks and Rec to director of Johnson County Parks and Rec. Not the same, I mean, there's a different scope of responsibility, and at some point in time, people have to realize that you reach the top of a pay scale, you need to look for another job. I mean, you need more responsibility if you want to increase, but right now, we just don't know that, and it's hard to tell with that MARC data where that falls. So I think by having a more thorough pay study that's focused just on our organization, we can dictate, here's the things that we want to see in that, and here's the people that we want you to compare them to.
When was the last time we had an official pay study besides just an internal
Maybe
little kind of?
2000, so 14 years.
Well, we've had comparisons in executive session where we, you know, the previous administration sought to increase pay. So, you know, I don't know that we can, and that was using marked data. And the people in this room benefited from that. So I'm not sure that we can say we don't have a marked survey, because we've been presented that information several times over the years. And of course, we know that at one time it resulted in a open meetings violation. So I think it's pretty well documented.
No, and I think that's what we're saying, we have had marked data.
We've had marked
But
data.
not
We want to study beyond the
Right.
market.
Exactly.
We want the market data to lead.
But Christie's already pointed out the point I made last week, which is really, you know, the better gauge of whether people are being paid well enough is whether you have a high attrition rate and you cannot fill that job. I mean, it really is an economic-based decision, not one that's patterned after other cities, because Christie just made my point. I mean, every city's different. Cost of living in that city's different. There might be geographical preferences that people have for working close to home. Maybe, you know, a lot of their friends work there. There's so many other reasons, and this brings back, I think, another problem with this whole bonus system. Well, first of all, you know, if it is a pay for performance, or you know, you don't leave it in the budget year after year, and that's really what you're doing, is you're inflating that person's salary, right? I mean, they get this increase, this merit increase in their salary, and it stays forever. So how is that going to motivate somebody to work harder? If as long as they make it 1 year, they get the benefit for 5, 6 years. And I mean, any psychologist or any Psych 101 class will tell you that inconsistent and, you know, unexpected rewards give you a much better bang for the buck than something that has a pattern to it.
So you're talking about spot bonuses, and to be honest with you, I've seen spot bonuses, I've seen project incentives, I've seen lump sums for incentives. I mean, there's many ways that you can compensate employees for performance.
Yeah, and
There's salary augmentations. But here's the
And
problem.
at this point, I mean, we're talking about a merit pool, and we don't necessarily have to marry ourselves to the idea of what you're arguing against right now. Maybe we could go a different direction with that. We've got the money in a bucket.
Well,
And I think that the consensus of council is, and you know, Tori, Heath, Christie, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've got the money in a bucket, and I think that we want the money in the bucket.
Let me ask for clarification. As I understood from the presentation, I mean, it looked to me like you're emptying that bucket. When I read that the city administrator is not recommending moving forward with that, we're going to pull that out of the bucket now. Is that not the intent?
Well, the recommendation is to move it out of the bucket, but we are looking, I mean, ultimately, you approve the budget. We make a recommendation, you determine whether you want to go with that recommendation.
So we need to have that clear direction for
Or
staff
you,
today of how to leave it in.
Yes.
I would leave it in the bucket right now, because there's a lot of variables that we don't know yet. And I feel like we're gonna add it back in, especially since we did kind of have consensus that we wanted it in there. I know there needs to be further study, but I would keep it in the bucket right now.
Okay, now here's the question though. Here's the question. I think we need to have some contingencies built into this. What I don't want is, I don't want a slush fund.
Well, no, I don't want that.
I don't want something that's just gonna be doled out with no rules, no restrictions.
Oh, no.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why we need that compensation study. That's the reason why we
Right.
need to come up with a consistent and empirical means of applying this. Whether we use spot bonuses or any other means, we need to know what we're gonna do before we allocate funds.
No, I think there should be some regulations, and so, I mean, I don't think it should just be a free-for-all in this bucket, but,
let me finish my argument, if I may, because it's important that, and Cheryl mentioned this, and I know you're all coming from a private enterprise background, but Cheryl mentioned this is what they do in private business, and that was one of the things that you mentioned. Just because they do it that way doesn't lend itself to a you know, a productive, tool